morning, depending on where you are tuning in from. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Bashir. You know me, I was here day 2 and so excited to kick off day 4. And before I do that, I will invite Dr. Kagema to just say hello and lay down the foundation for us today. Welcome, Dr. Kagema.
Awesome, Dr. Elizabeth from Texas. Good evening, esteemed participants. Good morning, Dr. Washira there from Washington, D.C. Good morning, Eugene, following us from Stanford University in California, and all other colleagues. I can see Dr. Kiambati Kellen from Karatina University, Caroline Dolkers, and the entire family that we have formed ourselves to. This is day 4 of our mentorship program. Just to remind you, the theme is empowering the youth for a global business ecosystem. We have been motivated, we have been mentored all through from Monday day 1 up to tomorrow when we are closing this great training. I believe there's a lot that we have covered. From our side is to welcome you. We'll have a very interactive session from Eugene there and David, and we believe it will be as impactful as it was yesterday. So please keep on board, be interactive as usual, and feel that even guest for that matter. Thank you, Elizabeth, and please take over.
Thank you, Dr. Kagema. At this time, I will invite Caroline to kick us off with the word of prayer.
Let's bow down for a word of prayer. Our dear Heavenly Master, we come before you today. We thank you for bringing us here. We ask that we may be able to understand everything that our trainers will teach us. We invite your presence. In Jesus' name we pray, trusting and believing. Amen.
Amen. All right. So again, welcome to day 4. If you have not already, go ahead and share this link with 5 people. I mean, be the friend that shares, the friend that shares resources to people. 5 people, just share it and say, hey, you need to be here. Give a shout out in the chat, and in one word, tell me how you would describe the past 3 days. In one word, how would you describe the past 3 days? I have been here every day, and let me tell you, it has been fire. I mean, fire in South Africa, fire in Kenya, fire in Nakuru, fire in Dallas. It's been fire. So I know day 4 will just be as blazing. And if any of you are TikTok followers, you hear that, I'm going to the streets. The streets are calling my name. I'm going to the streets. These are the streets that are calling your name. These streets of Youth Engagement Forum in collaboration with Karatina, we are calling your name. So answer, tune in, welcome. Reminder, as our trainers present, you can ask questions that come up. We will be sure to log those for our interactive Q&A at the end. Some people are saying awesome, amazing, yes, wonderful, packaged. Let me know, talk to me. I'm seeing you guys. And we have people on the panel from California, in Kenya, in DC, all over the place. Wonderful, Peter says. Kevin says amazing. I completely concur with all of those. Magnificent, absolutely magnificent, splendid, absolutely amazing. Somebody drop a hallelujah. Yes, all of the above. It's been fire. It's been fire. So we are so glad you're here. Also remember, this is a training. We have to know if you were here. And so at the very end of our session, we will drop a attendance form. We have collected this for day 2, day 3, and now day 4, and tomorrow, day 5. That will go live during the interactive Q&A. And don't worry, it is also in the description of this video if you missed that. And also our trainers, any notes they share, just hang tight, because after the forum, we will gather all those and be able to share those. So today our topic is on partnerships and alternative sources of funding. We have had questions from the past 2 days on how do I start up? How do I get funding? How do I do this? Well, today we are talking on partnerships. And Margaret Mead, which is one of my favorite quotes to use, she says that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So partnerships are important. With the right people, anything is possible. John Carmack says that a strong team can take any crazy vision and turn it into reality. Yesterday, our trainer Melissa, the chief penguin, said that you should have co-founders, because these are people that can bring a different perspective. They can challenge some of your ideas, really not in a bad way, but give you the alternative aspect, push you to think outside the box. Our trainer today, I will read his bio, is somebody that I believe can talk on that. Eugene Awori is a final year MBA candidate at Stanford Graduate School of Business, where he is the first African Knight Hennessy Scholar. Yes, Hennessy is not just a drink, my people, it is funding. Hallelujah, thank you, Jesus. He has over 6 years experience as an investment professional, predominantly in financial services and renewable energy. He started his career as an investment analyst at Centum Investment in Nairobi before joining the World Bank Group's International Financial Corporation in London as a financial analyst. He has also recently completed his MBA internship at a private equity firm in London, as well as a venture capital firm, Endeavor, in Nairobi. He graduated from the U of N University of Nairobi in 2014 with a first-class honors degree in actuarial science and is an associate actuary with the UK's Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. But don't worry, Eugene can talk more than money. He enjoys cooking and sports. Oh, he enjoys cooking and sports. So definitely somebody that can speak on the role of partnerships and ways to find alternative sources of funding. Plus, he can cook a meal. It's a win, people. It's a win. He can talk money, he can talk facts, and he can feed us. So Eugene, most welcome, and take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Elizabeth, for that amazing introduction. It's good to see you again, and David as well. I think since we met a few years ago in DC. It's a real pleasure to be here today with you and to take part in this very educative workshop. So let me just share my screen, and I have a brief presentation to go through. Please feel free to post any questions on YouTube, and I think Liz will read those out for me, and also I'll try and ask questions as much as possible just to make this interactive. I believe I stand to learn from you guys as much as I can teach. So let me share my screen. Well, I hope you can all see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
So thank you. I think Lee's already given an introduction about me, so I won't spend a lot of time here. I've spent about 6 years as an investment professional in emerging markets. Worked with some of these companies, and I'm just winding up my studies at Stanford and getting back to the industry in June. So I'll start with a little trivia, and the question I have for you all is, which is the most recent Kenyan startup to join YC? I think first of all, I'm curious, what is YC? Does anyone know what YC is? Please feel free to post on the chat.
Yeah, that's a good question, Eugene. I'm not sure what YC is. I look forward to seeing what people say, actually. Let's see.
Yeah, there. What does YC mean?
And I know that there's a slight lag between Zoom and YouTube, so we just wait a couple of seconds for this to come through. But I would guess young champions, maybe?
That's a good try.
Elizabeth, any guesses from your end?
I'm trying to think on my end as well. Why somebody said Y Combinator an incubator? Y Combinator is an American seed money startup accelerator launched in March 2005. Benita, did you Google Y Combinator?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely right. So,
Awesome.
so YC is Y Combinator. It's the most, I think, the most elite incubator program for startups around the world, and I think every young founder dreams of being accepted into Y Combinator. And so my next question, I think I've seen somebody has gotten it right on YouTube already. I'm seeing Onesimus Emeka is absolutely spot on. That Kidato is the latest Kenyan startup to be accepted in Y Combinator. So Kidato is an edtech platform that allows parents to homeschool their kids, not just on sort of the 844 curriculum, but also to give them life skills from music, programming, and so. I mean, I think this is just an opportunity that came up because of the of course the pandemic and parents having their kids at home and seasoned entrepreneur in Kenya, Sam Gishuru, took advantage of that and started Kidato, and now they're part of YC. So if you get into Y Combinator, I think you get a guaranteed amount of funding for your startup, and going forward, they always invest about 10% of whatever money you raise. So it's sort of, and there are a lot of investors, venture capital investors, which is what I want to focus on a bit today, who will invest in your startup as long as you go through Y Combinator. So they won't even do any due diligence. They'll actually just make a straight investment. So it's good to see that you guys are following the news and remaining commercially aware, because that's really important as an entrepreneur or even in your career. So before we get into any more details, I'd like to speak a bit on what venture capital is. So venture capital is the provision of early stage, high risk financing to startups that have a high potential for growth. And there are different stages to this. If you look at the life cycle of how a business is or a startup is financed, right? You always start with raising money from your, what you call, it's called a friends, family, and fools round. And fool is used here in jest to refer to anybody who's foolish enough to give you money so early in a venture. So when you start a company, of course, the first thing you do is put in your own savings, if you have any. Then you go to people who are likely to believe in you, and they'll give you money because of your integrity. They know this is my brother, this is my friend. So typically you will see people raise money from friends and family mostly. And then once you've maybe come up with a concept, right? You sort of have an idea and like, I think this can work. You've done some research. And next you go to what we refer to as angel investors. And I think those are very, very important in an ecosystem. Angel investors are usually mostly high net worth individuals who are sort of interested in a particular sector. So I'll give an example. I've worked in renewable energy a lot. So let's say a couple of years from now, I might decide I'm going to start investing in startups that are working in the renewable energy space, right? So if you come to me with a nice renewable energy idea, even if you haven't set anything up yet, I could give you, $5,000, $10,000 in angel funding for you to try and pursue your idea further. So angel investors, when they give you money, they actually don't expect to get it back. They're just taking a risk and saying, let me bet on this person so they can advance the idea further. I think the most famous angel investor in Africa is Tony Elumelu from Nigeria, and the Tony Elumelu Foundation gives grants to sort of thousands of entrepreneurs every year. I think that's something you can actually target to apply for. It's just an online application, and you get funding, and then you get a couple of weeks of training in Nigeria with other entrepreneurs around Africa. So from friends and family, you go to angel round, and then you go to, once you've gotten some angel funding, you probably have a product, right? It might not be perfect. It could be a product that's still in beta. Maybe you don't have any customers yet, but you have a working product. You raise what we call seed funding, right? So that is sort of like the first money that's coming to your startup with the aim of making a profit. So that's what we call the seed round. And then once you've raised your seed round, you start now raising, your next round is called the Series A, the one after that is called the Series B, a Series C. And as you proceed, the amount of money that you're raising becomes, bigger. So you find people will raise about, less than $1 million in the seed round, raise a few $1 million in Series A, and by the time they get into Series C, Series D, they're probably raising even $100 million. So I think as you're keeping up with news in the startup world, this will help you understand what is a Series B, what's a Series A, what's a seed round. At times you'll hear people saying they're raising a pre-seed round, which many times is just like the angel round, but at times we raise some money before seed. And then the goal of this is that eventually all venture capital investors, so venture capital is the piece between angel investing on the left and going public on the right. And by going public, we mean you hope that the company will become big enough to actually list in the stock market. I think you've seen lots of startups like Airbnb, I think most recently, going public. So that's how venture capital investors make their money. They invest in a startup over a 5 to 10 year period, 15 years at times, and hope that eventually this company will go public and do an initial public offering, and they'll be able to make money from that. So I'd like people to post on YouTube as well, on the comment section. What do you think are some of the leading venture capital markets in Africa? Which countries, which cities do you think are attracting the most venture capital? Please feel free to post on the chat.
So you're asking which country attracts the most capital in Africa? Is that what you asked? That's what you said, Eugene?
Yeah, so the markets that lead when it comes to VC funding in Africa.
Okay.
And I've given some very obvious hints on the slide.
Yeah, I would be guessing somewhere in the West Africa region, but let's see what the participants say. So we have one more saying Nigeria via Lagos. Kevin Shege says Kenya. So at least that's good. It's hopeful. Nigeria is another answer. South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they're absolutely right. So I think until recently, for a long time, the number one destination for venture capital funding in Africa has been Kenya, Nairobi, and I think Nigeria has sort of overtaken Kenya in the last 2 years. So first frame is Lagos, and next frame is of course Nairobi, still strongly in second position, and then we have Johannesburg coming in third, and Cairo sort of being the fourth largest. You can see that on the graph on the left. Last year, Nigeria raised about $307 million, just $3 million more than Kenya. And then you have Egypt at $269 million, South Africa at $259 million. So all in, despite us having a pandemic, African startups were able to raise 30% more in 2020 than they did in 2019, right? And that alone should go to tell you that investors around the world are very, very keen on betting on Africa. think it's seen as the last frontier where growth is going to come from. So there's going to be a lot of money sort of being invested in Africa. And so you want to position yourself to build a business that will be able to attract funding, and especially because you're very privileged to be in a market like Kenya. And certainly we're going to see why these particular markets are able to attract this much capital, what kind of infrastructure they have, and how you can sort of lean into that infrastructure. The graph on the right shows us most of this money is going to fintech, which is seen by many as the biggest opportunity in Africa. So sort of because we are sort of a very closed continent. So if you find to think what sector do I want to start a business, the graph on the right gives you a good idea. So fintech being the most attractive, anything from lending to payment. It's very hard to make a payment for Ugandan, and at least until a few years ago, it was very hard for Ugandan merchants exporting their wares to Kenya to get paid. Literally, it took days of doing bank transfer and making so much losses of foreign exchange to do that. Till today, it's very hard for a Ghanaian business person to be paid by a Nigerian client, right? And even though Kenya is very, very advanced in fintech, and it's David and Liz will know that it's easy to send back money to Kenya, instantly through applications like SendWave. It's not the case in many African countries, right? So countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, with very huge diaspora, they still don't have an easy way to send money home. They still rely on Western Union, which is a very long and secure process. So there's definitely a lot to innovate on that front. And next was agtech. So naturally, agriculture is the leading economic activity in Africa. Not surprising that there's a lot of innovation around agriculture, especially financing, smallholder farmers when it comes to, providing insurance to these farmers, providing farm inputs. You have, people like Waneka Fund, Apollo Agriculture, Pula Advisors playing in that field. And then there's also been a lot of activity in the logistics industry, and not too many startups, but very highly capital intensive. So companies like Twiga in Kenya, Lorry Systems, Kobo 360 in Nigeria that are solving this challenge of moving goods between African countries from one place to another. They're trying to make that easy. Now, of course, we have a huge gap in energy, healthcare, education, and you can see those are coming in as the other leading sectors. So this data is good to follow because it sort of gives you an idea, even as you're brainstorming what areas you need to look into. But there's a bit of a glaring problem when it comes to venture capital in Africa, right? The graph there shows that outside of South Africa and Nigeria, right, a lot of the founders who are raising venture capital funding are actually experts. And this is particularly a problem in Kenya, where you can see only 10% of the entrepreneurs raising money are actually Kenyans, right? 90% of the people raising venture capital funding in Africa are actually expert founders, mostly white Americans, who are moving into Nairobi because they see it as the tech hub of Africa. And so they're coming in, starting startups, and going back out to raise money, right? So this is a problem that's of course discussed a lot within venture capital circles, and everyone has a theory why that is the case. Of course, you have the colonial history, Kenya and East Africa in general, not chasing away colonialists at the time of independence. So you had, a lot of, white people who settled in East Africa and have become citizens. And you have also significant Asian population in both, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, that have stayed there and they dominate business. And so you've built this region where it's very expert friendly. You've got, the best tourist attractions, some of the best in the continent. A lot of foreigners want to come there and stay there and do business. So I think that's a problem. So as a Kenyan founder, your chances of raising venture capital funding are way lower than a foreigner coming to the country to do the same, right? And this is down to many reasons. I think that most of it is where the money comes from. So venture capital funding in Africa is largely coming from America, right? And if the money is coming from America, it's likely to end up in American hands. And there's a huge bias there from American investors to put money in a company that has an American founder. And so you'll notice a lot of even Kenyan startups, even when a Kenyan founder starts a company, they will try and get an American or European co-founder to put on their board. I think that was mentioned earlier about the idea of building a team and what you want your team to give you. So you'll see that Kenyan founders are being forced to team up with founders from other parts of the world to be able to even be taken seriously. So I think that's one reason there's definitely bias. Human beings are biased, and venture capital is no alien to this. And then I think part of the other problem that I see also is, and you should be very fortunate that you're having workshops like these where you get different people to talk to you about this. We Kenyan entrepreneurs and a lot of African entrepreneurs are not very good at telling their stories, right? Investors want to invest in a story that they believe in, right? And if you come to study out here, and I hope a few of you, some of you do get the opportunity to get into sort of good scholarship programs like the 900 scholarship that I'm on. As a side note, they actually just did announce the newest cohort that will be joining Stanford in 2021, and I'm glad that there's finally a second Kenyan getting to the program to study engineering, and you can check that later on the website. But the schools out here are very good at teaching kids how to storytell. That's why when you apply to American universities, even for college, for undergraduate, you actually have to write a lot of essays explaining why you really want to go to a certain school, why you want to study engineering and not economics. So children are taught how to tell their story, how to build a life story. And I think when you see a lot of entrepreneurs pitch, out here people will focus on the story of how big is this problem they're solving, right? And why is it very important? Why is it personal to them? While our own entrepreneurs back home tend to focus a lot on the data, the statistics, and the technicalities of how the product works. And that just becomes boring to investors. Investors want first to be sold on the story before they look at the details. So storytelling becomes a very important skill to learn. And so the soft skills that you gain from school, like communication, storytelling, are very, very key for you even as an entrepreneur, because most of the time you're just going to be selling, right? And selling is pretty much being able to tell a good story. So I think these are some of the challenges. It's a big problem with funding in Africa, and people have different theories of how to solve it. For me, I think one of the biggest ways we can tackle this problem is we have to find local funding, right? The government has to support entrepreneurs, has to put down money. Like, to build the Silicon Valley, the US government put in so much money in, Stanford, University of California, Berkeley, the learning institutions around the Bay Area, bet on entrepreneurs. It took decades to build the Silicon Valley to what it is today. So there has to be a lot of government effort. Now, what you have today in terms of sort of weather fund and all this youth enterprise fund is a drop in the ocean, and more needs to be done. And you also then need to have local entrepreneurs in Kenya starting to invest as angel investors in these startups. So unfortunately, a lot of the wealthy people in our country, they love to invest in tangible assets, property, and stuff like that. And they're not very, they look at startups as extremely risky, right? Which is true, but also startups can be extremely rewarding. And so people need to start understanding that trade-off. And the reason you see Nigeria, for instance, doing well is because they've actually had quite a number of successful startups that have become so successful that even the wealthy people in Nigeria are saying, let's start putting money in. So they're supporting the local entrepreneurs. A good example is Paystack, which maybe some of you know, which was acquired for about $200 million by Stripe, Stripe could be, I think, one of the most valuable startups in the world right now. They're worth about $40 billion. They do payments. It's based out in Europe, I think in Dublin, Ireland. And they invested in Paystack, which is a payments platform for businesses in Africa. And so when Paystack started and they were going to banks in Nigeria, many bank executives dismissed them, right, as what do you call in Nigeria, Yahoo boys. Basically, they're sort of the young men who swindle people on the internet. And nobody took Paystack seriously, including a lot of the banks they approached to invest in them. And today, Paystack is more valuable than the largest bank in Nigeria. So in just 5 years, these young founders have been able to build a business that's more valuable than the biggest banks in the country. And so that has made people start noticing and saying, hey, wait a minute, we need to to look to take startups more seriously. And I think Kenya also needs to get there, where we need to have a lot more successful startups that will make the richest people in Kenya look around and say, okay, let's stop just putting up the traditional businesses we've done, like property, and let's start putting some money in startups. So I think that's how you sort of close this gap. But there's sort of other things. There's so many players, and so going back to my earlier point, why are these 4 countries, between Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria alone are getting about 60% of all the venture capital funding in Africa. You add Egypt, that goes over 75%. So 4 countries are attracting almost all the money in the market, and it basically comes down to sort of the infrastructure you have, right, and sort of what people call the ecosystem. So what is the startup ecosystem made up of in that country? And there are many pieces to that puzzle. Starting with universities, you've got to have a lot of good universities that are training engineers in particular, right? So I think sort of a focus on STEM studies is key. You've got to have a lot of people doing computer science, BBIT, engineering, and related courses, who start to pursue these careers in programming. Because if you don't have engineers, you're never going to be able to build a product. So I think countries like Kenya are doing well on that front, because you have a lot of good universities and access to the internet, and people can teach themselves these skills. And many of these universities, as you can see, I think on the bottom right of this page, many of them have an incubation sort of center around the school. Strathmore has one. I think University of Nairobi has one. USIU, KU, and I think many universities in Kenya now have this. I think that's sort of where it starts, because that allows students while in school to start thinking of some of the business ideas they can come up with, right? You also need companies to have programs that support entrepreneurs. And I think we've seen that. I think many of you might have watched on TV, like the KCB. KCB has like a Shark Tank like program. I forget what it's called. And so part of what you can do as an entrepreneur is to try and partner with these people and find out what programs exist in my country, what companies are running, what is KCB, IBM doing. Many of them will have a competition where you can go and pitch your idea, maybe get some grant funding, $5,000, $10,000, and that money goes a long way in helping you grow as a startup. Safaricom has one, SAP, and Oracle. So you want to look at all these companies and see, what programs can I take advantage of? Of course, these companies will have different focus. So you have to also align your startup or your venture to what those companies are doing. You do have some sort of support as well from government and non-profit institutions in working in Kenya and Africa at large. I know in the work of the IFC, we had the sort of the annual sort of youth enterprise forum that David, I think, chaired for a while. And this is sort of a competition of ideas between African students. I know the IFC is sponsoring an annual competition in Egypt for startups. So these institutions, in partnership with government, are actually working to create opportunities for you to go out and showcase your ideas. And you need to take advantage. You definitely need to take advantage of that. You of course have a bunch of companies that I call intermediaries or advisors here. Their job is to help entrepreneurs raise money. Now, many of them are not going to work with you from a very early stage, but from the time when you have a product and you're raising a seed funding, then many of them are likely to work with you and help you, introduce you to investors. So all across this particular list, the ones at the bottom are the ones that are likely to work with you at the start. So I'm gonna share this slide with David and Liz, and I'm sure they'll share it around. The companies at the very bottom are the ones that start out with very early stage ventures, and as you go up, as you grow, then you start working more with the companies that are higher up on this particular graph. So I think this sort of gives a good summary of what the tech ecosystem looks like in Nairobi, right? And you can see, for example, just to focus on the finance part of this venture capital, at the very early stage, you have the likes of Savannah Fund, Growfin, and Alibaba that are likely to put in money in your venture. And then once you make some progress, then you start approaching now your typical venture capital funds that invest in Series A and B going forward, right? You have companies like Telecom Capital, which I worked for some time last year. That is I think the largest venture capital firm in Africa. You have, Partech followed by Partech, and all these companies, many of them do have offices in Nairobi. So you really have an advantage by being in Kenya, because all these companies have a presence in Nairobi, because to them Nairobi is the tech hub of Africa. And of course, eventually, as your company becomes big and your investors want to exit, they hope that they'll be able to sell the business to the private equity investors at the top, because those ones buy a business once it's already profitable and it's mature. Or if they don't buy it, then you have the option of listing it in the stock market. So I think because many of you are just getting started, you want to focus on the bottom of this slide and see what universities, what companies, what co-working spaces can I, maybe after graduating school, you probably want to start spending some time at the iHub or Nairobi Garage and working from there, so you can bounce off ideas from fellow entrepreneurs, and then hopefully make an application to some of these incubators that can then sort of give you some credibility as well as funding and help you really scale to the next level. I'll touch quickly on what venture capitalists look for in investing. So the first thing a VC will look at is the market, right? They'll be like, do I like this industry? So for instance, right now in Africa, we show up with anything fintech, agtech, edtech, they're interested, right? They're like, this is something we can look at, because we believe fintech is going to be huge. Why? Because there's still a huge number of unbanked people in Africa, and it's still very hard to make payments in Africa, and it's still very, very difficult for small businesses to access financing or to even get paid, right? So that's the first thing they look at. Is it a big enough market? Is the market growing very fast? How fragmented is that market? Because that gives the opportunity to consolidate some good market share. For instance, fintech is becoming less and less attractive in Kenya just because M-Pesa is so dominant, right? So Safaricom, M-Pesa dominates the fintech space in Kenya. So because of that little fragmentation, it's becoming less attractive. And that's why you're seeing more fintech investors move to Nigeria, for instance, where you don't have one big player who's dominating that, right? And then people will also think, what other sectors or industries or markets can this invention be applied to, okay? I'll give an example. In the US now, there's a lot of investment in electric vehicles, especially when it comes to the battery and the charging technology. But investors know that if we find a winning formula for electric vehicles, that can also be used for solar power projects, right? So we are solving a problem in this sector, but if we manage to do it, it can also, that problem can also lend itself to other particular sectors. So the market is a very key thing for VCs. They wouldn't even look at a market that they're not interested in. Then two, they look at the business model. So fine, you're working in a great industry, but what is your product, or what service are you offering? What is the fit between this product and your market, right? What's your revenue model, and what's your cost structure? So how do you make money? I'll give an example here with, say, Twiga. They say, okay, fine, agriculture is a big economic activity in Africa. It's definitely a market we want to be part of, and it's growing, right? Because the population is growing. So they look at Twiga and say, so what exactly is the service? And Twiga will tell them, we match farmers farming their potatoes in Nyandarua with a chips joint in Nairobi CBD that's struggling to get good prices and regular supply for potatoes. We'll now allow these chips then to purchase potatoes directly from the farmer in Nyandarua on our platform, right? And why does that make sense? It makes sense because the farmer will get a better price for their product, and the chieftain will also get a better price and more reliable supply, and perhaps better quality goods, because they've cut out the middlemen who are eating most of the profits, right? So they look at that and say, wow, okay, that kind of makes sense for both parties. It's a win-win situation. So the business model makes sense, right? But how do you make money? And Twiga will say, our revenue model is we charge a percentage of goods that are transacted on our platform. So if a farmer buys potatoes worth $100, maybe we'll charge $2, right? So it becomes very clear. This is our business model. This is how we make money. You have to be able to explain what your business does to somebody in one sentence. If you can't explain what your business does in one sentence, it's probably too complicated for anyone to understand that business model. And I think the easiest explanation people use nowadays for a lot of business model is, I am the Uber of X. And that's one way you can think about your business, right? If you look at one of the interesting startups I've seen come to Kenya lately, they help hospitals obtain blood, oxygen, and other regular supplies when they need it, when needed. So what do they call themselves? We are the Uber of hospital supplies, right? Because when a hospital needs something, they'll go to the app and and just order oxygen from the app, and we will deliver it to whoever needs it when they need it. So think of it's one way to think about also to brainstorm on ideas. I want to build the Uber of Dash, and let's figure it out. Because Uber is considered one of the most innovative business models out there. And finally, VCs are going to look at the team. So at the end of the day, when you're investing very early stage in these ventures, you're putting a lot of trust on very young people, mostly without a lot of experience to execute, right? So there has to be a strong belief that this team is driven, it has the experience, right? So for example, if you're going to do an ag tech business like Twiga, they have to say somebody in your team who has a background in agriculture, in logistics, because this is a huge logistical operation. If somebody has never, moving food around Kenya is a hard business. They're not going to give money to an entrepreneur who's never done that, who has no experience. So you can't come from working in, finance like me throughout your career and start a logistics business without a partner who has experience in logistics. So it's something to think about when you think of co-founders. Don't just take your friend because you're friends, but you all have the same background. You're both programmers, right? You don't complement each other. So they want to see that the team complement. You actually have complementary skills, right? The CTO is coming in with a strong tech background. The COO is maybe coming in with a strong operations background. The CEO is probably coming with a strong background in that particular sector. So there has to be a balance. If you have a chief marketing officer, they're coming in with a strong sales background. So you have to make sure you're building a team that actually complements each other, right? And then has this team worked together before? That's one thing investors will always ask. If you guys maybe could be a colleague, work in a different team and you work on projects together, or you guys could have done a business, run a small business together before. That's something investors love to see. Then of course, what's your track record, right? So if you had a career, how successful was your career? If you have had a business before, how successful was that business? So your track record is important to investors. And I mean, to some extent, some investors care about education, right? If you're a techie, they want to know, okay, did you go to the best engineering or computer science school in Kenya or wherever else you went to school? So that also matters some investors. It's of course extremely depending on the market. If you look at the US, where people anchor a lot on where you went to college, two schools, Harvard and Stanford, control 70% of venture capital funding. So you find that graduates of those schools have become very successful just because they have a very strong alumni network there. So you find a lot of entrepreneurs targeting to go into these schools because they know once you go there, it's easier to get funding. And so people either go in early in their careers, or you have some entrepreneurs who are CEOs who then start going for executive training programs much later in their careers because of the value of the network. So I think that's also something to think about. I'd love to ask a quick question. So between these three, the market, the business model, and the team, which one do you think, if you are to invest in a startup, and of course all these operate within a regulatory environment. So part of why Kenya is attracting a lot of funding is people consider Kenya to have a very good regulatory environment, to have a government that is pro-business, right? If you don't have that, no one is going to put money in your country. I think that, for example, if you look at Ethiopia, a larger, bigger population with more natural resources barely has any startup activity because it's a very tough regulatory environment for foreigners. So you find no venture capital is going to go there. So, but I'm very curious to hear from you, between the three, the market, the business model, and the team, if you were to invest in a startup, which one would you compromise? And why? Maybe you can type a brief explanation on YouTube. Which of those three would you compromise? And of course, inversely, which two are you not going to compromise? I'm curious to hear. Would you invest in a good market, a good team, maybe not the perfect business model yet, figure it out along the way, or would you focus on business model and industry and say, the team is not very strong, but they're in a great market and they have a great business model, or the other way around? I don't really think good about the market, but this team is so good and their business model is so good, they're going to succeed in this industry anyway. So which of these three are you willing to sacrifice?
Olela Tony said the team.
Interesting. Anyone else?
He said the team which will spearhead the business growth. The market, Hawala says.
Mm-hmm.
I will say whichever one Eugene says.
Oh my God, nobody is ever right.
Jenga said the
Yeah.
business model.
Yeah, and Jenga says, yeah, Harry, exactly. I agree with Jenga and Harry, and I think there's no right answer to this, but it's a matter of preference. I agree with Jenga and Harry. I would personally ignore the business model, right? Because what happens at times is when startups startups evolve very, very fast, right? And part of what a good venture capital, even when someone comes to invest in your venture, you want to ask yourself, what does this investor bring to the table? Is this somebody who knows this space, perhaps has invested in this space before and can help me really refine my business model? Because so a lot of VC funds will focus on market and team, and then they'll say we'll figure out if we have the right team and in the right market, we can iterate our business model over time. When Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook while at Harvard, he had no idea, right, what Facebook is going to become or how Facebook will ever make money, right? He just wanted to create a directory for people to be able to find each other on campus, right? And then it became big overnight, and he said, oh, wait a minute, we can take this to other Ivy League schools, right? Let's go to Yale, let's go to Princeton. And then he said, wait a minute, why not invite other US colleges? And it was catching up, and that's why he quit Harvard and came to live at Stanford because there's a lot of tech talent here that he wanted to hire. And he started raising money from entrepreneurs. He had no idea, past 7 years of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg had no idea how Facebook will make money, right? And then he started realizing, wait a minute, because we have so many users around the world, we have so much data. What can we do with this data? And back then, machine learning and artificial intelligence were not a thing, right? But he figured, now that we have a lot of data on people, how can we process that data and start selling it to companies and to marketing agencies so they can do targeted advertising? So today, Facebook makes money from ads, right? It's not something Mark Zuckerberg knew 10 years ago, right? But it's become one of the biggest companies in the world because of just selling advertisements, right? And now 60% of ads are digital. So the business model evolves over time for a lot of entrepreneurs. And the idea is that if you invest in the right team, they'll be able to pivot as much as needed until they find the right business model. So a lot of investors will focus mostly on the market and the team, and then work together with entrepreneurs to figure out what business model is going to work. So I think the last thing I want to talk about before taking some questions is when you read a lot of, and if you want to, networking is very, very important in this industry. So you always want to know which startup is raising money, who is the founder, which funds have invested, and take notes. If you're planning to start a business in agriculture and you hear pool advisors raise money, you want to note down all the venture capital guys who've invested, because that way you know here are some VC firms that would invest in agriculture in Kenya, right? But when you read these New York Times, some of these terms don't make sense. What does that mean? And so I think one thing you read about is you read about pre-money valuation, post-money valuation, and people always confuse of which is which. Just remember this simple equation: pre-money plus money equals post-money. What does this mean? If my startup, so when an investor comes to you to put in money, they're going to ask you to value your business. They're going to tell an investor, well, look at me, I have these many clients, I have this much in revenues, I think my business is worth $10 million. And of course, you're going to debate, the investor is going to try and bring that valuation down. you're going to try and bring that valuation up. Until you agree, fine. Your business is worth $10 million. That is what you call the pre-money valuation before the investor invests. So you agree my business is worth $10 million, okay? And you're telling the investor, I'm raising $5 million to help me expand to the rest of East Africa. So that's the money. That's whatever series you're raising, series A, B, C, the investor is giving you 5 million, right? And usually it's many investors, not just one. So that becomes your pre-money was 10. You've now raised 5. So if you add up the two, you get 15, which becomes the post-money valuation of the company, right? So if you're the entrepreneur and you own 20% of the business, right? So you can work out how much your value has grown between one series to the other by saying, okay, I own 20% pre-money, and maybe I've sold 10% of the business, so now I own 10%, but the business is worth more. So that's sort of how when you see those valuation numbers, always try and work out, okay, what was the pre-money, what was post-money. There are some other key terms that come up when negotiating venture capital, and you have to be very careful as an entrepreneur. In fact, I would personally encourage you to, as much as possible, try and do what you call bootstrapping, so not raise money externally. So try and bootstrap as much as possible. Try and take advantage of grants and competitions that give you, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. And we actually do have, we're doing a Stanford Africa Business Conference next weekend. We actually have a startup pitch competition, and we're giving away money to the winners. So you want to take part in competitions like those to raise free money, because the more you raise money as an entrepreneur, the more you dilute your ownership. So when you start the business with your own savings, you own 100%. When you go to raise money from an investor, you've got to sell a certain percent of your business. So every time you raise money, you're selling a percentage of your business. And so what happens over time is that you lose control of the business, and at times even investors will keep you out of your own venture. So you've got to be very careful when raising money from investors. So the first thing is, investors will always ask for very, very attractive terms when making money. There's something called liquidation preference, which simply means when you sell your business, you first pay me before you pay yourself, okay? Now, remember, when venture capital guys invest, they'll tell you, I'm giving you $10 million. I'm expecting, let's say, a minimum return of 3 times on my money. So at minimum, I want $30 million. So if your business succeeds and you sell the business for $40 million, the entrepreneur will first take their $30 million, because you signed that you've guaranteed them 3 times their money. Then the remaining $10 million, you're going now to share that proportional to your shareholding. So you could actually work very hard as an entrepreneur, be very successful 10 years down the line, but then the venture capital investors will take away most of the money. So you have to be very careful with giving out these terms. The other thing venture capital investors will negotiate is what you call anti-dilution protection. So basically, investors are saying, if I own 25% of your business, I want you to guarantee me that as you raise more money in future, my shareholding is not going to be diluted. In other words, you're going to give me pro rata rights, which means every time you raise money, you will give me the option to also give you money. So you find that a startup will raise money from, when they do a Series A, the investors will give money in Series A, will also give money in Series B, C, D, E, because they're trying to maintain their shareholding. That's what we call anti-dilution protection. And then lastly, sort of tag-along rights simply means if you sell your business, I also have the right to sell my shareholding in your business as well. So those are some of the things that you read when you read venture capital news, and that I hope that sort of helps you have an understanding of how VC works. So yeah, happy to take some questions. I see Liz has joined.
Thank you for that, Eugene. So the questions will come at the very end of the Q&A session. So I will do that at this time. Again, well.
What time is that Kenyan time? So I can just take note.
Yeah. So the Q&A after David presents his session, which will approximately maybe 9:20, 9:30.
Yeah.
I would Texas time. So yeah. So in about 45
I would say maybe
minutes.
in the next 20 minutes maximum. We'll start the Q&A.
Thank you. Again, thank you, Eugene. And for all those tuning in for YouTube, most welcome. Thank you for the engagement, the questions, the feedback. As normal, we will have a Q&A at the very end. A reminder that we have a daily attendance form for today, day 4. This will go live during the Q&A, so continue to hang tight for that, and I will be sure to make that announcement. Our next topic is on intellectual property management. And this one is one I can guarantee as the rapporteur, I will be sure those asking for a friend questions will be asked. Because my friends, all I can say about this topic is this, and listen very carefully. As an intellectual, I do believe the intellectual property must be managed and managed so intellectually that it knows it's by management. That's my quote. That is my only quote on this. And though our next trainer needs no introduction, allow me to do so because I want no wahala when we meet for a family reunion and we are called by our intellectual property manager, our mother, to ask why I did not give due diligence. Dr. David Washera is a speaker, a mentor, a philanthropist, and fintech entrepreneur. His passion is on the youth, where he is committed to helping create a world in which they can actively manifest their dreams, gifts into reality. He is a co-founder of the Youth Engagement Society, whose mission is to empower youth through connections with others, such as what we are doing today with Karatina University. He is currently a public sector specialist at the World Bank. He has served as the co-secretary for the World Bank Group's Youth to Youth, also the co-founder and managing director of the fintech startup WirePay. Prior to joining the World Bank, he taught public policy, public finance, bureaucracy, public administration, history, and economics. Yani, our 2 guest speakers today, are intellectually property manager and finance gurus. So he is surely the person to intellectually tell us about the intellectual property and patented. And yes, my friends, I know nothing about this next topic, but I will be engaged. We're going to the streets, right? We will take notes. Without further ado, Dr. Washera, most welcome.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, or should I say Dr. Washera, for that hearty introduction and welcome. And yes, there will be no wahala when we meet for family gatherings. My thanks to Eugene for really setting the segue for the next topic that we're about to discuss, which is on intellectual property management. So you've gone out for venture funding, you have acquired some, you're ready to launch a product, then what? There's some things that can happen to you that would really remove the stuff that you have created and it not be of benefit to you, largely because someone comes in and takes a product or an idea that you had. And this is where intellectual property comes into place. And so I will just quickly define what intellectual property is, why it's important, particularly for you as young entrepreneurs, and why we should consider this, particularly even as we start out with our products. So in general terms, intellectual property, which I will henceforth call IP, is a product of the human intellect that laws protect from unauthorized use by others. The ownership of intellectual property inherently creates a limited monopoly in the protected property. So what does that mean? Basically speaking, intellectual property rights are a common type of legal protections for those who create, ambao wametengeneza, those who create or make things. These rights have actually contributed enormously to the world, in particular, economically. Many companies in a variety of countries and industries identify and rely on enforcement of their patents, trademarks, and copyrights, while you as a customer can be assured the quality you're getting when you're purchasing intellectual property or IP-backed products. If you have ever bought a counterfeit item, you get home after you spent a lot of money and you're like, man, these shoes are not Nikes, or this perfume is not 1 in a million. That is a good example of counterfeiting and where intellectual property has been violated. So the law of intellectual property can be seen as analogous or comparable in certain respects to the law of tangible property, in that both consists of property rights to the owner. So you have tangible property, that's something that you can hold, you know, your house, your car, we call those tangible property. Intellectual property you can't touch, right? It's intellectual, right? But the laws that protect both types of property are similar. However, the law of intellectual property is separate and distinct from the law of tangible property. So in one hand, where the right of exclusive possession for something that is tangible, if you buy something, it's yours, you have exclusive possession of it, you're the only one who can touch it, you're the only one who has access to your house and so forth. That's at the core of personal, or what we call real property. This is land or chattels, which is something that refers to tangible, movable property like a car or like clothes. They can be moved, they're not fixed in a particular place. So the same cannot be said for intellectual property. Let me try and put this another way. Intellectual property and the normal property that we're used to, that I'm calling tangible property, are analogous in that they perform a similar function, but they're not the same. A better example is think of the wings of an insect and of a bird. They're both wings, distinct evolutionary, perform the same activity, but they're different. They're not one and the same. They're similar, but not the same. That's how I would describe intellectual property versus tangible property. Right? Think of them as wings, one for a bird, one for an insect. They're similar, perform the same thing in that they bring protections to the individual, but they're not the same. Now that we have defined intellectual property, let us gain a better understanding of what it delivers and how you, as a youth or entrepreneur, should value the protection for the different types of intellectual property. So the question becomes, why are they important? The purpose of intellectual property rights is to encourage new creations. It includes technology, artworks, and inventions that might increase economic growth. Intellectual property rights increase the incentives for you as an individual to continue to produce things. Otherwise, you would not be producing things if there was no protection. If you knew that you spend all this time creating something, but then someone else can come and take it and use it as their own, the incentive for you to create it in the first place would be removed. You would not be working. So intellectual property protects your creations. This is done by incentivizing you as an author, an inventor, a music creator, or whatever, etc., to produce works that benefit the public. That's the general notion of why intellectual property is there. It's to incentivize you to create something with the guarantee that we will protect your creation so other people do not misuse it. But since the public can just wait until you have created something and then replicate it, save themselves the research and the time that went into it, time and money, intellectual property is meant to protect you by regulating the public's use of your work in order to ensure that you as an author, inventor, or music creator are compensated or paid for your efforts. So there are four main types of intellectual property. The four common ones that at least we refer to, and I'm pretty certain you know some of them. So these four are patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets. I'll define each one very briefly. A patent is used to prevent an invention from being created, sold, or used by another party without permission. If you've been paying attention to the news lately, there's been this discussion about what we do about COVID vaccines, because a lot of development went into the creation of these vaccines, millions and millions of dollars, billions and billions of dollars. And the maker of the vaccine, though wanting to have a common good, is afraid that if they release this vaccine, they're going to lose all the money and effort that they put to it, which is why governments like the United States, the UK, and others have come in and paid those companies for the time and effort that they spent creating something that was for a common good. That's what a patent is. Patents are the most common of intellectual property rights that come when people think of intellectual property rights protections. Another one is a trademark. This is probably another one that you're familiar with. This is another familiar type of intellectual property rights protection. A trademark is distinctive. It's a sign which allows consumers to easily identify that particular good or service that a company provides. Some examples, think of the McDonald's Golden Arches. Think of Coca-Cola. Think of Safaricom and their logo. Think of Facebook, the F logo that they have. Think of Instagram. Think of WhatsApp. When you think of these tools, logos come to mind. Think of cars. What does a Toyota logo look like? What does a Tesla logo look like? And so on. A trademark can come in the form of a text, a phrase, a symbol. It can even be a sound and a smell or a color scheme. Unlike patents, trademarks can protect a particular set of class or classes of products and services instead of just one. So Coca-Cola has a trademark that protects every single thing that Coca-Cola does, not just the Coca-Cola soft drink. McDonald's has a trademark. Safaricom has a trademark that protects every single item that they do. Another one is copyright. Now, a copyright does not protect ideas. Rather, it covers tangible forms of creations of original work. Think of art, music, writing, or even software. The copyright owner has the exclusive right to sell, publish, and reproduce any literally music or dramatic artistic work created by the other. So a copyright is, Sauti Sol has come out with an album, Oh Susanna, right? They have a copyright on that song in that they are able to sell it and monetize it. When you go and bootleg and download the song, that's violating intellectual property of Sauti Sol. Lastly, we have another one called a trade secret. Trade secrets are essentially what they are. The definition is simple. Trade secrets are secrets of the business. They are proprietary systems, formulas, or strategies, or other information that is confidential and is not meant for authorized commercial use. So let me use the example of a soup. Say you have a soup kitchen and you have a restaurant and you have a very particular set of unique formulas that you follow to creating this particular food item. That would be considered a trade secret, right? It's what you make to monetize. If someone was to come and violate that trade secret by stealing it from you, you're protected. So although intellectual property rights may seem to provide a minimum amount of protection, when they're utilized wisely, they can maximize the benefit and value of a creation and enable a world changing of technology. Think of the big tech companies and how many patents that they have, Apple, Samsung, and so forth. The reason why they're able to inject so much money into research and development, the reason why you as a startup should at least on the onset feel comfortable injecting some money into your business or to an idea that you have is knowing that you are protected by intellectual property. In a knowledge economy, which is what increasingly we're becoming, where people, the capacity for their ideas and information generate value that far outweighs the traditional sector, you're finding that government's recognition that information is valuable in the information age is increasingly becoming important. So IP or intellectual property is central to converting that raw material, that knowledge and information and ideas into something that you can actually trade. And as a result, it becomes an intellectual property asset that continues to ensure the economy thrives. Now, you may be saying, you know what, we're in Kenya, ideas are stolen all the time. And you may very well be right. Kenya is a member of the World Intellectual Property Organization, the WIPO, and the World Trade Organization. Kenya is a signatory to other major international and regional property conventions. However, I would be remiss if I did not say that enforcement of intellectual property rights within Kenya and in quite a number of other developing countries is lacking, which means it poses the rights to the holders. There are a lot of pirated and counterfeit products in Kenya, and they present a major impediment for business operating within the country, including yours. For example, the industry estimates that piracy and counterfeiting of business software, records, music, and consumer goods and electronics, such as mobile phones and pharmaceutical in Kenya, costs over 300 million in lost sales revenue that could be going to the original property rights holder. And this is just for US businesses operating in Kenya. Think of what it is globally. But change is coming. The government of Kenya's intellectual property bill, passed last year in 2020, seeks to tighten the control and policy of intellectual property enforcement. Specifically, the bill combines all four of Kenya's IP-related agencies to form one that is being called the Intellectual Property Office of Kenya. Now, I want to close with this. The general idea behind this forum has been not only to educate, but to offer solutions for our youth entrepreneurs by providing guidance and access to information that you may not have known or may have otherwise been unattainable and untenable to you. In discussion of this, I want to present one final type of intellectual property protection that I find extremely useful but underutilized in Kenya. This is a type of property right that we call geographical indicators. Geographical indicators and appellations of origins are signs used on goods that have a specific geographic origin and possess qualities, a reputation or characteristics that are essentially attributable to a place of origin, i.e. Kenya. Most commonly, a geographic indication includes the name and the place and origin of goods. This is a Made in Kenya brand. Now, just yesterday, I received a request from a beekeeping enterprise in Laikipia, and I believe they are also following us here. Please comment below if you are. I was touched by the compassion and moved by the passion exhibited by our youth when they presented this. The qualities of your beekeeping export is a product of the type that I'm talking about that attains protection under geographical indications. This is best highlighted in the following video.
What do Darjeeling tea, Cafe de Colombia, Prosciutto de Parma, Camp-Hot pepper, champagne, tequila, argan oil, Swiss watches, Chilicanas, and Bohemia Crystal have in common? Yes, they are all well-known products that have prestige among consumers. But the story doesn't end there. The taste, qualities, aesthetics, and reputation of these products are all deeply tied to their geographic origins. Each product has a legacy built upon unique environmental conditions and local traditions from their specific regions of origin. In the legal world, they are known as appellations of origin or geographical indications. The World Intellectual Property Organization runs an international registration system that makes it easier to protect these product names and their legacy. Known as the Lisbon System for International Registration of Appellations of Origin and Geographical Indications, it ensures, for example, that only pepper that genuinely comes from a specific region in Cambodia and meets the predefined traditional production requirements can be called and sold as Camp-Hot pepper. This special protection is available in every country of the Lisbon system. To spice up their sales, all the pepper producers need to do is to apply through the World Intellectual Property Organization for the protection of their region-specific brand. It's not just the Cambodian pepper producers that benefit from the Lisbon system. Producers of many other traditional local products do too. The small-scale farmers, the artisans, and the business owners. They all want stronger protection for their local and traditional products in global markets. And the consumer? They get assurance about the quality, authenticity, and traceability of those products. The Lisbon system is an all-in-one solution for producers seeking protection for their geographical indications and appellations of origin in multiple countries.
So why did I share that video, and why do I want to talk about geographical indications? It's simply because of this. I believe that quite interestingly, or quite for us, it is something that is underutilized for us as a country, or us as youth entrepreneurs. We find that there are a lot of protections that we can have, at least on the intellectual property management front, if we are able to team together and create something of a product that's unique to our individual ecosystem. So let me go back to the example that I just gave a little bit earlier about the beekeeping enterprise in Laikipia. Now, this beekeeping enterprise has one particular goal and mandate, and that is to sell or transform beekeeping by giving it a very unique, honey that is being sourced from Kenya. That's a protection that you can find under geographic indicators. You can actually have this, apply under the Lisbon Protocol and actually have this as a protection with you and others. There are a lot of this stuff for people who are working within the youth endeavors, right? Particularly artisans in the industry. There are a lot of things that you can utilize for yourself. So I want to open up that discussion a little bit more. I have shared the links to those below. I would encourage you to go and read this information for yourself, find out why and how you can use the Lisbon system to protect your geographic indication brand, why you should think about processing some of these items, and why they're so important for you as you scale up to the international level. So without further ado, let me turn over the mic over to my sister Elizabeth, and we can take questions and responses from the audience. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, David, for that. I can definitely say, I can say more now about intellectual property management, and I learned one thing today for sure about trade secrets. And now that we have listened to that lecture, please let me add an addendum to our intro. The music that the moderators and the panelists sing out loud at any time, we do not own any copyrights to that. We use them because simply we love the music, or we just want to keep this forum so engaging. So yes, we have not violated anything, at least on that end. Before I hand over the forum to our Q&A moderator, I know we have great questions. Just a reminder that we will compile the takeaways and the notes from our trainers after the forum ends on Friday, and arrange them and curate them to send to you. So we ask, that you hang tight on those and wait for that email when it comes forward in a few days' time. Also, the not the Zoom link, the daily attendance form is live. So you can be sure to now take in your attendance there. You can find that in the chat box below, but you can also see it in the description of the of this video. That will stay live until after today's event ends. So that way, those that are not able to click, open it, and fill it out can do so. Should take less than 20 seconds to do that. So please just be sure you do that today, as the link expires today. And without further ado, I know we have questions. I have asked some myself. Remember, I am the asking for a friend. I do not hesitate to ask those embarrassing questions that maybe I should know, but I don't. With that, I will hand it over to Dr. Mushina.
So thank you very much, Elizabeth, and our co-host and our speakers for the day, Eugene. Eugene, you showed us the money. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Dr. Wachira, for ever being graceful. Thank you for reminding us that it is our role to protect our intellectual properties. Thank you. So we have quite a number of questions, and today we shall have a question for each speaker. So we'll have a question alternatively. So we start with Eugene, and then the next question will go to David, and then we'll continue like that. So Eugene, there is a participant. Working at home, so sorry for that. That's a commercial break. We continue. Yeah. So thank you guys for bearing with us. So our question, the first question goes to Eugene. Our participants want to know. Yeah, they are referring us to the presentation yesterday, and they are saying that in the presentation, there was a pattern where expert founders raise more money than local founders. So on the basis of that premise, they continue to ask, how do we level the playing field and increase the amount of funding available to the locals? And then still on that, they're asking, how can we incentivize the government to increase funding for local startups? So Eugene, if you're okay, you can take up that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I hinted on that in my presentation. I think it's going to be very hard for us to try and change the behavior of foreign investors. They have every incentive to put money in their own people's hands. So I think what we can do is I like to look at problems in terms of what can we do internally first before we even start looking at what we need to do externally. So I think one is we need government to put more money in early stage ventures, and I think they definitely I mean, the government has done quite a bit to support entrepreneurs, but there's still a lot to be done. I think particularly how the pots of money available, like the youth fund or the women fund, how they're administered and what people really see as businesses in Kenya. So many of these largely go to people who are just supplying goods and services to government rather than people who are innovating. And so I think we definitely need to push for more money to be allocated to innovators. I think, and even if this is hard to do at government level, I think we need to push county governments. I think it's probably easier to get audience from the the county government in Nyeri and say we want 10 million available to 10 University of Karatina enterprises every year. I think it's probably easier to push that at grassroots level rather than national, and to encourage county governments to provide some funding, even if it's interest-free loans, to enterprises started by students from the region. And then the other thing is we have to push local entrepreneurs to put more money in startups. We have a lot of wealthy, high net worth people in Kenya, and the challenge is that they're not putting money in startups. When Michael Zuckerberg started Facebook as a student at Harvard, he got his seed funding from one of the American billionaires, Peter Thiel. So if a billionaire was willing to invest money in a second year college student, why is that not happening in Kenya? So we need to get these wealthy people to start seeing, even if they're going to put only 1% of their money in startups, but they need to start doing it. And it's happening in Nigeria. In South Africa, it's just not happening in Kenya. And I think as the property market maybe flattens out, they might be forced to start saying, where else can we put money? But also some of the startups that exist need to succeed to the level where more and more wealthy people in Kenya will start putting money in startups.
Thank you very much, David, for that astute answer. The second question, though, asked when David was speaking, I think it can be directed to, when Eugene was speaking, we can direct it to David. Now, Daktari, tell us, some companies and programs take advantage of startups and go away with the idea. How can we protect our startup? I think this participant wants to know, how do you balance between disclosure, because you will have a lot of information to disclose while you're pitching up the idea, and the protection of the intellectual property?
Yeah, certainly.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll cover on this, and Eugene, feel free to chime in if I left anything out. I'll tell you from our end what we have done as a startup. So you'll be exchanging a lot of information with people who you want to invest into your idea. One of the things that you can do is start off with non-disclosure agreements and non-compete agreements. That way, when you start discussing ideas with people, this has been signed, and there's a clear guidelines on what will happen if somebody were to void the agreement. So, and there are standard NDAs there, and we can share those with you. I understand that Kenya is kind of nascent in the protections of IP, but I believe that it's a growing aspect. On top of it, IP or intellectual property is protected at a global level, right? Under things like the Madrid Protocol and so forth. And that's where when you apply, and you can do it online in the links that I've sent to you through Kenya and through those protections, is that you have some other recourse, right, for your protection. So this is a global protection in all the participants and signatories of this. And as I mentioned, Kenya is increasingly becoming aware of the need to protect intellectual property because it's seen as a way to stifle economic development. So going back to the start of the questions, the thing is, don't just share information, with everyone that you meet. If you have to, then, prepare NDAs, and we can, of course, assist with those. We can share, these are non-disclosure agreements. We can share standard examples of those. I don't know if Eugene has any input on how startups, based on his experience, better protect their ideas when they're going to pitch.
Yeah, David, you're absolutely right. You need to have very, very strong NDAs. And I think there's a tendency of startup founders to try and save money upfront by not working with lawyers. So you want to work with very good lawyers in your industry to get very strong NDAs. And I mean, avoid putting very sort of sensitive information in your pitch decks. A pitch deck should be quite general and not go into the real detail of your product. And I think finally, at the end of the day, you can have all the contracts in the world, but it always comes down to integrity. So you have to also do due diligence on investors. So I think everyone knows investors do due diligence on startups, but you also have to do due diligence on the investors. So before you approach a VC investor, you want to talk to entrepreneurs who probably received money from that investor before and find out what their experience has been. Right, and I think stories are out there in the market about investors that you don't want to touch. So don't just take money because you're desperate. Do your due diligence on investors too.
Thank you, David, and thank you very much, Eugene, for those responses. Now, this question goes to Eugene. This participant says, I have seen some entrepreneurs, when they borrow from the lending institutions, they start focusing on repayment of the borrowings instead of focusing on manipulation of profits. Is that good? Where should the focus be? Getting money to repay the loan to remain afloat, or do you start thinking about enhancing your operations for profitability? I think basically that's the question. Go ahead, Eugene.
Yeah, so I think startups are very high risk ventures, and I would avoid putting debt on a startup absolutely until much later when your profits have stabilized. So at the start, you don't want to take, because a startup is meant to be a high growth vehicle. You sort of have this 5-10 year period that you're targeting to continue growing. So you can't afford to be paying money out. So you need to focus on raising equity, not debt, because equity investors, you don't have to pay them a dividend, right? So you can reinvest all the money you make up front to grow and only sell the company once it matures. If you have, for some reason, to raise debt, maybe you should consider raising other forms of debt, such as what you call mezzanine financing, which you only pay if your profitability reaches certain milestones. But you cannot put standard loans on a startup. It's just not going to work. If COVID hits and you had a lot of loans, how are you going to repay that? So I think work with equity investors, or at least mezzanine finance, and not taking loans from banks. You want to focus on growth and retain as much money as possible.
Thank you, David. I think, Eugene, that is well answered. Now, Dr. Ashira, tell us, what are the stages of patenting?
Yeah, so the stages of patenting, first, the assumption is that you have an idea or a product that you have created that you want to protect, right? So say you have developed the next best way to charge phones faster, or to make the phone's battery last longer, and you don't want someone to go in with that idea and mass market it and steal it. So that's how a patent is done. And sometimes it will involve a proof of concept. But the rules are pretty clear. And in the links that I had shared above, I would encourage you to click on them, visit the WIPO. It sets the standards and the guidelines, including the fees, and you can apply directly with them. Note that these are geographic specific. So for example, if I'm in the US, I will apply at the US Patent and Trade Office. If you're in Kenya, you will apply at the respective office. However, with the geographic indications, like I had mentioned earlier, you can apply some of those directly through the Lisbon Agreement with the WIPO, and I've shared the links on those with you. And that really helps, bypass some of the countries that may not have very strong IP protections. So you can go directly and apply with wild intellectual property, institutions. So that's usually the general idea for a patent. For a trademark, it's quite easy. You just draw something on a piece of paper, or a sound, or a smell, or whatever it is that hasn't been done before. You specify the particular good or class of service it is in. So they'll ask you this logo, is it for a food and drink item? Is it for music? Is it for technology? And you select these classes, and you can select as many classes as you want, right, of protections. So for example, Coca-Cola only makes soft drinks, right? As an example, they don't make t-shirts. They're not in the t-shirt business. However, they have protections that you can't take the Coca-Cola logo and put it on a t-shirt, because they got the Coca-Cola logo protected under the class for clothing, right? As a startup, you may not have the money to protect yourself across all these different classes, because for each class of protection, there's a fee. But you can at least select 1, 2, or 3 classes that are unique to you. So for example, WirePay is a financial technology company. We got a class of protections and technology. That's where we applied. We didn't particularly care about protecting ourselves in clothing, because we figured nobody's coming in tomorrow and putting the WirePay logo on a t-shirt. Now, once we get a little bit more progressive and we raise a little bit more money, then maybe we can add other protections. So you will note in closing, you will note that, remember, you can have 2 different logos that are very similar, but they're in different classes, and that's allowed. So for example, there is Dove, the soap company, which is owned by Unilever. And then there is Dove, the chocolate company, which makes chocolates, right? So those 2 have the trademark for their logos, Dove, but they're similar names and stuff. The reason why they're able to do it is because they're in 2 different classes. One is making soaps, the other one is making chocolate. So they're not going to cross over. So they, under patents and trademarks, they're allowed to have. So you're not going to be able to come in and say, look, I have this particular company that I'm doing, and this is my name. But if you're in timber and somebody else is using the same name to make a food product, the trademark will be allowed to go, because they're in completely different classes.
So thank you very much for your astute answers, Daktari. And thank you for even taking the part on the logo. So over to you, Eugene. So this participant wants to know whether there's a possibility. Is there a possibility of an investor to invest in team dynamics, even if the idea or business model is not that convincing? So I think this came up in the discussion, which among the 3 are the most important, and some affirmation on this is required from the participants. Please go on, Eugene.
Yes, so I think as I mentioned, there is no right answer to that question, right? It always depends on the situation and circumstance. Yes, there are times when an investor would love the market and the business model, and maybe not like the team very much. And what you'll see happen in that case, the investors will buy the business and then they will change the management team, right? So they will introduce. So maybe they thought, well, the business has a good technical background, but they don't have a good person, say, on strategic finance or on marketing. So the investors will give money, but they'll say, we're giving you money, but we're bringing in a new, say, chief marketing officer, we're bringing in a new CFO. So investors will always change the team, and you see that in these startups every time. I think there's currently probably some conflict going on at one of Kenya's most successful startups, Cellulant, where we've seen the founding CEO having to leave the company. So investors will always, at times, they'll only do that if they know that once they buy the business, they'll be able to change the management team and have the team that they think is going to succeed.
Dr. Mashina, you're muted.
Sorry for that. Sorry. Dr. Elizabeth, thank you for that notification. Thank you, Eugene. Your answer is good. And we proceed with Dr. Wachira. Now, there's someone who is asking, can these intellectual properties bring about monopolies? I know you said this expressly, but I think they are thinking about the contradiction between creating a monopoly
Yeah.
And in the market economy, how do those contradictions balance?
Yeah. So inherently, IP is meant to bring in a protected monopoly for a certain period of time that the patent is active. So, and this is done to protect or to incentivize you to go and create and research and whatever with the notion that your ideas will be protected for a certain period of time. Let me use an example that I gave for drug companies. Drug companies is a heavily capitalized business. You require a lot of research and development for a product that not only takes a lot of time in terms of money, but also a lot of time in terms of the period that it takes, to go to market. So if that's the case, you'll find a company, most pharmaceutical companies will spend billions of dollars to get paracetamol out on the market. So when paracetamol came out, it was initially protected, right? There's a patent usually lasting for 10 years to protect that particular good so that the company that designed it or made it and poured all this money in it is able to recoup some of the lost capital that they put into it, and then of course make a profit. And then because it's a public good, after a little while, the patent lapses, and anyone else can take paracetamol and make it and sell it. So the idea of it is that it does create a monopoly, but only for a set period of time, a protected period of time, because the information usually for whatever that design is already out there, right? So let me put it in another example. There'll be a disincentive for companies like Samsung or Apple to push the platform of development if they knew that the moment they do it, somebody's just going to come in and take the new screen they had made. So they have protected classes on this, in that they're able to pour research and development, and once they get something that's marketable, they get a protection that allows them to get money from it. Eventually that becomes released to the companies. On top of it, you don't have to wait until the patent lapses. If I have made something that you, Dr. Mushina, want, you can come to me and request for the license to use it. And I say yes, and then you pay me to use my product, even though I have the patent. As long as I have the patent, you continue to pay me the license. So what's happening back in the COVID examples, in that companies have, with the help of the government, been incentivized to distribute their vaccines for free, with the government paying the costs for development of those vaccines. Because in most places, well, let me give the example of the US, the vaccines are being given for free. So me as a consumer is not paying for the vaccine, so the company is losing money for something that they develop. So the government steps in and pays for that protection. So there are quite a number of arrangements. Vaccines is one, interesting outlier because of where we find ourselves with COVID, but it's a very good example of how intellectual property can be used. Then the other one is you coming in and paying me so that I can give you royalties, or I can give you use of something that I have created. Over.
So thank you, Dr. for that very good answer. I hope the participant who had asked the question is satisfied. Thank you. Now over to Eugene.
Dr. Mushina, you went mute for a little bit.
Oh, sorry for that. Okay, Eugene, now it's your turn, and there are two questions in one. Someone is asking, what should a startup consider when coming up with a value proposition? And then closely related to that is another one from a participant who is asking, how do you split? How do you determine how you share out the shareholding among the co-founders? If you have more than one person as a shareholder, as a co-founder, how do you share the value? Over to you, Eugene.
Thank you. I'll start with the latter question. So the issue, of course, splitting up shares in a startup is a very controversial one, and again, there are different ways to do this. I think what I see avoids a lot of problems is you want to have an easy way to make decisions. So if, let's say, you're two founders and you all have equal share, it means every decision needs consensus, right? And that can be very difficult to attain, right? So I think if you're 3 founders with equal share, it's probably going to be easy because you can simply agree, we'll put it to a vote, and 2/3 will win. If you're 2 founders, I think my own thinking is that the best way to do it would be to make sure there's one person, probably the brainchild of the idea, to have slightly higher shareholding than the other, and sort of have veto power in terms of, we'll seek consensus as much as possible, but then when we don't agree, I have more voting power than you. So that power dynamic is very clear. But when it's not very clear who has authority, then it becomes very difficult to make decisions, and that's how you end up with all this matters. So either I'll suggest odd number of founders with equal share, or if you're 2 founders on even number, you want to make sure one at least has slightly more shares than the others and can, when a decision needs to be vetoed, then they can, because startups operate in a very, very fast changing environment, and you have to make big decisions every day with very limited information. So you can't afford to be in a situation where you cannot make decisions. To the question on value, I think if you study marketing, there's a product or service has different types of value, and I think people mostly focus on one value, right? So which is many times the functional value, like what does this product do, what does this service do to you, and people tend to focus a lot on that. I'm building let's say you're building an edtech platform, you're saying I'm giving you a solution to homeschool your kids, and people will focus on the functionality of the product, right? But there are 3 other types of values that you need to be able to, and I think as a founder, you want to ask yourself whether your product touches on all those 4. So you have the functional value, this is what this product does. Then there's a monetary value, right? Are you getting better value for money by using this product? So a good example, I use SendWave to send money back to Kenya. It does the job. It allows me to send money straight to anyone's M-Pesa, right? That's the functional value. The monetary value is that it's saving me, because I'm getting better foreign exchange rates, it's actually saving me money. So there's a monetary value to using it. Then the other values I think people ignore mostly, there's a social value and there's a psychological value. So social value could be, I think right now investors care a lot about things, ESG issues around climate, gender. So you'll realize investors are very interested if you're providing, say, financing to smallholder farmers, to women-owned enterprises. You're tackling a problem that's an issue to do with climate change. Let's say you're providing clean energy. There are those social values that you need to also think about when you're building a product. And then lastly, there's a psychological value, right? And I think the best guys who know how to use psychological value is Apple. The reason Apple is the largest company in the world is because they're very good at playing the psychological value. They make people who buy their products feel they are part of this innovative and very aspirational community of people. And at a time, even though their product may not always be the most superior in the market, people will still pay a premium for it just because of the psychological value. It's the same thing members clubs do, right? People pay $10,000 to go to Capital Club in Nairobi because there's a psychological value of what that belonging to that club is seen as, to come with some sort of psychological value. So you've got to think about those 4 and make sure your product at least, well, maybe most of it is going to be functional or monetary, but also you want to think about the social and psychological, and especially in your fundraising, social value has become extremely, extremely important to foreign investors.
Thank you very much, Eugene, for your answer. I've particularly found the answer on the dynamics, the management dynamics of the startup very interesting. I think that's very good advice to follow. You don't want a situation where you have deadlocks and other issues and people cannot move forward. And at the same time, the other people are waiting for responses from you. So to Dr. Wachira, now you have this question, where the participant wants to know if someone does a cover of a song and then uploads it on social media, is that a violation of the originator's work? And then while you take that, you could also take this other one, which is asking, governments have obligations to regulate the importation and exportation of counterfeit products. For example, can the tax authority in a certain jurisdiction claim taxes on duty on counterfeit products? I think that is a tricky question to ask. And if yes, why do such have counterfeit products? So your turn, Daktari.
Certainly. So the first one is quite simple. I also had to look it up because this is not my area of expertise on cover songs, but this information is readily available online, particularly in YouTube has mentioned this. They have a whole entire video titled "How to Legally Cover Songs on YouTube Without Copyright Infringement." So I suggest for people to take a look at that. I will paste that link below. But in short, anyone can cover anyone else's song and its creator cannot say no. That's the compulsory part. So the creator cannot say no to you covering a song. However, if you do a cover song, you must pay a royalty to the song creator. That's the licensing part. If you do it on YouTube, YouTube will monetize that to the whoever holds the licensee. So for example, thankfully YouTube has made it a little bit easier for this, so you don't have to worry so much about copyright aspects, as long as you are aware that you would not be able to, you can do it and you would not be able to monetize it. So I recently uploaded a video on YouTube with the cover song by Sauti Sol and Shoma Josie, right? So YouTube catches that and tells you that you don't own the copyright of this. It's a yes, no aspect. And if you believe that you own the copyright, then you have to provide proof. If you don't own the copyright, it just tells you that it will make the owners of the copyright benefit if the video is monetized on YouTube. So any proceeds from that are sent directly to the recording company. So if you want to do a cover on YouTube, you can easily do it. You don't have to worry so much about those things. But if you're planning on monetizing it yourself, then you will need to get the license from whoever the producer or the production company of the song was. To the other question, yes, governments are held liable and accountable for enforcing intellectual property. This is one of these things that actually comes up in the cost of doing business. Businesses that are interested in moving to Kenya will ask themselves, how do we know that our intellectual property will be protected? And the Kenyan government under the WIPO protects that. Now, be that as it may, even in the US, a lot of counterfeit goods come in. There's no possible way for customs and regulations to open every single shipping container that comes in. When they do catch it, they're supposed to keep it off the market. And so in a roundabout way, yes, duties are paid on counterfeit items because they come in masquerading as other things, or they come in masquerading as the real thing, and so duty collection is paid on them. Though in a properly enforced system, when a government detects a counterfeit item, it's supposed to seize it and destroy it. And the loss goes to whoever was making the counterfeit item.
So thank you very much, Daktari, for those responses. Now, this one is for our friend Eugene, and the question is, I think there's a lot of focus. There's a lot of interest on the three items of the triad. So this participant is asking: is it really essential to focus on the market as a priority? Is it a concern to me because the market keeps on changing and growing? Yeah. If you are to focus on the market, to what extent do you cover? Yeah, if it keeps on changing and growing, are you still supposed to keep tabs as an entrepreneur or as a startup? Eugene?
Yeah, so I'll highlight why a market is important. So how venture capital works, and like other forms of investment, we always joke that VCs are paid to be wrong 90% of the time, right? So venture capital investments, 90% of them fail, even at the very best funds in the world. Majority of startups fail. Even if all these three things were good at the start, majority of them fail. So as a venture capital investor, your hope is that for every 10 investments you make, one of those companies will become a unicorn, will become extremely successful, right? So And you want, when it becomes successful, it has to be extreme success. I'll give an example. When Stanford put seed money to start Google, when with sort of 2 PhD students here, Stanford ended up making 3,000 times the initial investment by the time Google went public. And that allows the school to make many other investments to other students that maybe didn't become as successful. So a venture capital investor is always looking for 10 times growth. You have to be able to demonstrate that this industry can grow 10 times. Because the idea is that, okay, I'm giving you money right now. I'm hoping that several years down the line, your company is going to be 10 times, at least 10 times as big. You cannot achieve that in an industry that's mature. If I give an example, let's say the cigarette or the alcohol industry in Kenya, where you have sort of big companies like EABL and BAT, they're in the industry and you sort of have these, imported beers and liqueurs. So it's a mature industry. Or cement industry, for instance. It's hard to imagine the cement industry in Kenya is going to grow 10 times between 5 years from now. So that's a mature industry. They're looking for industries where you can demonstrate that this thing is going to be big. Let me take an example: e-learning and edtech, right? Which many, even in universities and schools, did not have e-learning platforms, right? And then a pandemic hit, and suddenly everyone realized we need to have a way to be able to do classes and exams with our students being away, right? The Law Society of Kenya just learned that the hard way recently, that we don't have a way to administer exams. So people are going to move a lot more towards e-learning, and you can actually demonstrate that this is something that is just starting and is going to grow very fast in the future. Or, telehealth, for instance. The fact that now there's a pandemic, going to hospital means you're risking getting COVID. More people are now willing to take their hospital appointment from home. You've got to show that this industry is growing. If you look at fintech, for instance, even though mobile money is very big in Kenya, 95% of purchases are still done in cash. When you show that investment, and this industry is this big, but still majority of payments are happening in cash. So imagine how big it's going to be when more and more people keep moving towards digital payments. The point is, for venture capital investors, they're always looking for an industry that's going to grow very, very fast. And as an entrepreneur, you've got to have evidence and show them, hey, look, Kenya has a huge undersupply of fish. We're importing 80% fish from China, which is not even as delicious as fish that we have here. So my business is going to, so you actually have demonstrated a very huge market gap that shows a huge potential for growth. So that's very important, because the investor is hoping that your company becomes 10 times, at least 10 times as big for him to be a successful investor. So I think that's why it's important. And yes, you have to keep tabs with the market. The market will keep changing. And I mean, people say that the best entrepreneurs create their own market. When Steve Jobs invented the iPhone, there was not really a market for iPhones or smartphones. Nobody even knew what it was until we all bought our first smartphone, and then we got addicted to it. So some entrepreneurs are able to see a market that's perhaps not visible today, and those are just genius level of entrepreneurs. But for majority of businesses, it has to be a market that you can demonstrate that this market has been growing. For instance, if you look at, let's say, number of payments that are being processed digitally in Kenya for the last 5 years, you can see that it's growing at almost 30–40% each year. So you can actually make the case that this is a fast growing industry. But on the contrary, we're looking at an industry where, if you look at the volumes, they have been pretty much flat. A venture capital investor is not going to give you money. They want to see an industry that's growing.
Thank you, Eugene. I think those answers are very relevant to the ideas we are shaping in these young people's minds. Yeah, they should be things they are able to associate with. And thank you very much for that. Now, up to you, Dr. Wachira. There's a question here from our participant who wants to know, when is it the right time to formulate an IP strategy for your startup idea? And then they continue to say, considering that early phases of running a startup is more likely to be characterized by chaos. Still on that, they are asking, now that you mentioned about the use of the importance of using an undisclosure agreement, wouldn't that block potential partners? Yeah, so please take up that, Dr.
Yeah, so it is it's never too early to start thinking about intellectual property management. In fact, it may sound laborious, but it is one of the things that you should consider at the very beginning of your journey. How do you protect this idea that you have or this venture that you have? Otherwise, it could all be for naught, right? If it's not protected on the legal aspects. So, and I know that, you know, being a startup myself, I understand how, you know, money can be tight at the very beginning and you're being pulled in all sorts of different directions. For us personally at YFA, we decided to, because we knew the general direction we wanted to go, as Eugene mentioned, we bootstrapped. And by bootstrapped, that we did not go out for external funding. We tried to heighten and sharpen the idea as much as we could amongst ourselves. Oftentimes, I find that startups only think of financial resources, you know, and what those can bring, and you're so plagued on quickly moving, you know, to the next stage where you can actually earn money. But I would caution against that, and I say that resources can also be in terms of time. How much time do you devote to ironing and sharpening up an idea, and also protecting an idea? So for us, we had little resources. And so it meant that we spent a lot of time on research and development. And one of the things that we decided to focus on chiefly from the very beginning was to trademark and protect our idea. So we did that. And of course, you know, it was one of the costs that we put in on the budget. That way, even when we're going to now speak to investors, angel investors, we are still at the concept stage, but we can say, you know, look, this is just how serious we are about this. We have trademarked this in 145 countries, right? And that just shows how serious you are about your product. So we trademarked in Kenya, we trademarked in the US under the Madrid Protocol. We also trademarked in the UK, but then Brexit happened. So we had to trademark again to protect ourselves under the EU, right? And this were ventures that we found equally as important to sharpening the idea. So I would say it's never too early to think about intellectual property management. A good number of this stuff can be done from your own desk. All you need is internet connection, and you plug in directly to those rings, submit your applications, right? They, of course, you can seek some legal guidance. And if you're interested in that, please shoot us a link, an email to youth@engagementsociety.org, and we can put you in touch with some of the legal partners who are at least willing to look at this, at least have the start conversation with you on a pro bono venture. But there are a lot of people who can give you some guidance. I'm sure, you know, even if you're thinking about your startup journey, you know, shooting an email to Eugene and saying, hey, look, this is what I'm thinking about. What would you advise? I'm sure he can take 10, 15 minutes out of his time based on his experience and give you some insights. Because that's essentially all what we're all about, is actually empowering our youth to better decision-making through some of the paths that we have gone under. So in short, it's never too early. When it comes to non-disclosure agreements, those are there to protect your idea. That way, when you approach a potential partner, they don't take your idea and run away with it, right? That's what a non-disclosure agreement does.
Thank you, Dr. Ari. Those answers are right spot on, and I think the participant who had asked the question has now been better informed. Now, the last question for Eugene this evening is, now someone seems to understand that you've put a lead on the possibility of borrowing. So they're asking now, if then you cannot borrow, and which other ways are you going to use to harness the capital that you require for your startup? I think you'd mentioned this in the training, but there's no harm in going about it again. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I did mention on that spectrum of funding that your first pot of funding to consider has to be the friends and family round, right? So you want us first to, you know, if you're doing this with, you know, one or two other people, you want to see how much resources you can mobilize on your own, and then try and bring in, when you say friends and family, you're targeting people who they know you, they believe in integrity, and they're willing to take a bet, right? And say,
Recording in progress.
Yeah, so they're willing to take a bet on you and say, we'll put money in Eugene because we know Eugene who he is and we believe he'll do his best to make us money, right? And these are people who, even if it doesn't work out, they know it's not going to be an issue because it could be, and it's something better than handout culture when you actually reach out to friends and relatives and say, hey, I've completed university, I have an idea. Do you mind investing 100,000 in my business? And they understand people will be open to that as opposed to just giving you a handout, right? So try and leverage friends and family first. And then once you exhaust that, you then move to these angel investors. And there are many, I'm going to share a link with the presentation. I think I saw a question as well on where else people can raise funding. I'm going to share a link that has some of these. There's a slide on the diagram, but I'll share a link that also has their contacts. You try and take part in these grant opportunities that where you can win $10,000, $20,000 and use that money to bootstrap, right? So I'm just saying avoid borrowing as much as possible. Now, if you have a business that's maybe asset intensive, and let's say you have some land and you want to do a business on that piece of land, then it's fine to maybe at that point borrow against that land. But a lot of startups today don't have any physical assets. People are starting startups from their own bedrooms, right? And running from a bedroom for a couple of years. So in that case, you don't really have assets to borrow against. But if you have a business that has assets like land, then you can always borrow against that asset because worst case, but if things go south, you will lose that piece of land, and you've got to be ready to do that. But when you borrow money, loans are repaid based on cash flow. And when you start a business, if cash flows are far out, let's say you're trying to come up with an innovation, it's going to take you a couple of years before you start seeing any revenues. So how are you going to pay the loan? On the contrary, if you're investing in a business that's very cash rich, that's going to start generating cash immediately, right? Then you can consider, but you have to be very conservative when it comes to this.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm sorry to have to drop off now to get into another meeting, but I really enjoyed this, and I'm definitely going to send the presentation with my contact. So feel free to send an email if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer those. And please network as much as possible. When you come to a forum like this.
Thank you very much, Eugene. Thank you for taking time to mentor our youth globally, and thanks for whatever it is that you're doing with Stanford and the rest of the places where you participate. Thank you. So now that we let Eugene off, we can finish off with Dr. Wachira. So
Dr. Mushina, just want to aware you, we are out of time. So I think what we will do is we have great questions that came in, and I think we can have our trainers, we can share those with our trainers to make sure that in their notes, they share those, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's okay, Dr. Elizabeth. I think we've handled most of them, and since we are time bound, we could end our evening here as far as the questions are concerned. Back to you, our host, Dr. Wachira Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that interactive Q&A session to our audience. Thank you for making that possible. We could not have had those questions answered without you. Before I turn over to Dr. Kagema, just want to make a few announcements and clarifications. As Dr. Kagema may have put on the chat, the certificates that will be provided at the end of the forum, once that is completely done, are for those that have registered, but also those that have filled out the daily intake forms. The reasons we have to timestamp these is because, as you know, if we were in person, we would do a feedback form immediately after. And if that is not filled out when you were there, the assumption objectively is that you were not there. So that is why we have to do it that way, because we do have to have some type of bookkeeping on our ends to justify that we gave these certificates to individuals that did attend and engage. The other one is that we will share and curate all the notes and takeaways from our trainers. We are aware that the live chat conversation does disappear, but rest assured that the links and the resources that your trainers have mentioned throughout their sessions, they will be shared. Allow us to make sure we do that. We've had a lot of content shared, so you can imagine that compiling those into a credible and useful report will take some time, but those will be shared via email. Again, this is why attendees need to be registered so we can have your emails. Again, this is why we need the attendance form so we can know which sessions you attended. So please make sure you are very intentional in doing those. The attendance form for today will stay live after the session ends for about 15 minutes to allow those that are not able to do that during the live session to do so. We understand there are some who have those challenges on that point. Thank you for being patient and allowing me to moderate. I have truly enjoyed this session, and now I know what to say when I sing songs, when I share songs. I know that there's such a thing as a trade secret, and I know that there is such a thing as venture capitalists. Imagine I am a social scientist. I am in the public health area. So you can assume some of this content is not common to me, but that's okay. It is common to the Dr. Washiras and the Eugenes and some others. And that is why this forum is important. So we can level up. We can level up. We can level up those skills. So not only do we have ideas, but we use our intellect and our capacity and the resources we have to be able to manifest those ideas into something. And with that, Dr. Kagema, I invite you to close us out. Asante.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elizabeth, for your wow statements. At least listening to you makes one feel so highly connected, despite you being thousands and thousands of miles away from our home country, Kenya. So we appreciate that. Just to tell the participants that tomorrow is our closing day. We'll have one of the most exciting lectures and talks to be delivered by Manuela Di Muzio from all the way from Washington, the World Bank, and she look at the challenges that we might experience in all this journey of entrepreneurship. So keep tab, and we will sincerely welcome you tomorrow. Finally, allow me to request Mr. Ngugi, the Dean of Students of Karatina University, to give the vote of thanks and also to pray, to give us some closing prayer. Mr. Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Kagema. I think mine is very simple. It is to pass a vote of thanks, and I want to start by thanking our trainers, Eugene, Awori, and Dr. Washira. I can attest that you cannot get tired listening to them. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the Youth Empowerment Society team, and more specifically today's moderator, Dr. Elizabeth. I also take the opportunity to thank the university, Karatina University, for supporting this initiative. It's our commitment to continue empowering our students with different skills and competences. I cannot forget to mention the participants. Without you, the training will not be successful. The many questions that you asked is an indicator of how you yearn to learn more and more. I don't want to forget the technical team led by Carol and Dorcas from the S team, and Grace and Judah from Karatina University. I also want to take the opportunity to thank my colleagues, specifically the Dean School of Business, Dr. Bishuhi, Dr. Mushina, Dr. Kiabati, and Dr. Masharia. I also want to thank Dr. Kagema the coordinator, community outreach. I know we have walked a long journey as we were planning this activity. And I'm happy that tomorrow it's coming to an end. Finally, I want to challenge all of us that the biggest gap in life is between knowing and doing. Now that we know what we should do, I challenge all of us to go and do it, because that will make the whole difference. With those many remarks, let us bow our heads as we pray. Our Heavenly Father, we come before you this evening in thanksgiving. We do appreciate that you have been there since we started this training on Monday. As we near the end of this training tomorrow, we are praying that you're going to be with us. As we disperse, may you disperse us with your blessings. When we meet tomorrow, we do not forget to thank you. We pray this, believing and trusting in Jesus' holy name.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are tuning in from. Go